Gacha games live or die by their characters. You can have the deepest combat, a generous pool economy, and an engaging story, but if the characters don't make the player stop and appreciate, nothing else matters. I've spent over 10 years playing gachas, and in that time I've watched character models climb from cool little 2D sprites to full 3D rendered models that rival traditional console or PC games. Every major gacha pours serious resources into making their characters look as good as possible because they know that's what sells. And the developers of Genshin Impact have come up with a formula that's kept them on top for year after year. But what happens when an established titan in the industry is challenged by a newcomer? I'm Forte, and let's talk about how, pound for pound, Wuthering Waves takes the edge in character design over Genshin Impact. Now from the top, I have a lot of respect for Hoyo and Genshin Impact for launching gachas into the mainstream. I'm even a huge fan of ZZZ. That said, what you like and what I like is completely subjective. You aren't wrong for finding any particular design appealing, and I'm not wrong for wanting Galbrena to step on me. We like what we like. Though admittedly, WuWa didn't always have the strongest character design. During its 1.0, one of the most common complaints thrown at the game was that it had a fairly generic character design. This isn't to say that the characters look bad or anything, they just tended to lean towards the safer side of the pool, and were more or less what you would expect. But there are objective and concrete reasons why a design can be considered good. On a technical level, when it comes to designing an actual character model, the bumps, folds, layering of the clothes, and all the general fine details are what gives the design depth and makes the character feel more real. It is common for games to create models and use different ways to create an illusion of depth as a way to cut down on development time and resources. Both games are guilty of this, to be fair, but upon closer inspection you'll quickly realize that in WuWa, many smaller details like buttons, overlapping fabrics, and stuff like that are actually part of the model and not just painted on. For example, let's take a recent-ish release from Genshin, Flins. Without zooming in, I think the character generally looks fine with a lot of edges and patterns that seemingly give depth to the outfit. However, once you get closer, you'll see that a lot of the intricacies in the outfit are just painted onto a flat texture. Genshin has been a lot better about this with their more recent characters, but when it comes to the actual geometry of the 3D models, Genshin tends to lean into this. That said, they do a really good job in giving that illusion of depth. For some characters, I had assumed some parts of the clothing were sculpted into the model. That was until I was zooming in really close and I saw it was actually 2D. Details like this are easy to miss individually, but they all come together to make a more visually appealing design because these tiny parts are affected by the environment, i.e. lighting, gravity, etc., as you move around the world. On the aesthetic side, the smaller details work with the bigger design pieces to reveal hints as to who the characters are and to tell their stories. For instance, I believe Lynae's design is one of the strongest in WuWa when it comes to storytelling. On the surface, Lynae is sporting a colorful, free-spirited schoolgirl kind of look, but her entire design is a rejection of her old self, and Kuro did not waste a single opportunity to convey her story through her design. The school uniform, the accessories, and the paint splashes directly contrast with her previous occupation that had her living a much darker life. Lynae's bright blonde hair is one of the most striking design details, especially since she's the only character with visible roots letting you know that her hair is dyed. And her entire design is reminiscent of the Japanese fashion culture, gyaru, which in and of itself is a rejection of the old. To be completely honest, at first I didn't care much for Lynae's design because while I thought it was fine and that she looked good, I figured she was just a rebellious academy girl. But once I learned about her backstory, she immediately became a favorite, and I grew to appreciate the details that went into her design. For Genshin, personally, I think a lot of the designs don't do as great of a job conveying the story behind the characters, so let's compare two characters that were released around the same time, Luuk from WuWa and Varka from Genshin. Starting with a quick look at Luuk, you may not immediately pick up that he's a doctor, but once you look over his outfit, it starts to clue you in on who he is. The coat, the gloves, and the DNA helix motifs do a lot to convey that he works in the medical field. Looking even closer, his visible veins on his neck and arms are hinting at an entire story on their own, but I think the symbol on his chest is even more interesting. Without diving too deep into the history of the symbol itself, the symbol here on the left is often mistakenly used to represent medical practices, especially in medias like games, when in reality the symbol on the right would be the correct one to use when referencing anything medical related. Luuk's symbol having two snakes, one that stops at his chest and the other one being winged and curling up around his neck, is an amazing detail and you cannot convince me that it wasn't intentional. No spoilers. On the other hand, Varka doesn't give me the same level of details to theorize and play with. Though in his defense, I could just be completely missing something. There's always that. I can see the armor under his coat, suggesting that he's a knight or maybe a mercenary. His stature and general size does give the impression that he's the leader of the faction that he's from, and other than his scars, I'm not getting too much here. And this is a problem that seems to persist in a lot of Genshin characters. Though it is fun to see how Genshin characters implement their element jewels into their designs whenever something is done with it, but a lot of characters do just kind of have them embedded into a belt or somewhere on their back. I did notice that not all characters have one though, like Galbrena, so maybe someone can tell me what that's about in the comments. To be clear, I do think the majority of Genshin characters look great, and even if the designs aren't pushing some big narrative, I think it's still fine as long as the design excels in just being cool. Some character designs are too busy for my taste, but I acknowledge that's just a personal gripe, and there's some really standout ones that I love. Like, Kinich's design is so fun to look at. All the boxy elements and accessories remind me of pixelated retro games, and his oversized headband that's almost starting to cover his eyes makes for a really unique looking character. And Mavuika? I don't say this often, but I would risk it all. But all things considered, the argument for WuWa's designs being generally more compelling than Genshin's is hard to deny. And while other Hoyo games do benefit from having much stronger designs, there's just a certain level of attention to detail that WuWa brings that makes it such a formidable competitor in the gacha space. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you hated it, tell me why my take is garbage in the comments. And while you're down there, let me know what character design you think is actually top tier. But until the next one, this has been Forte, and I'm out.